U.S. Representative here for the Washington's 6th District. It's Derek Kilmer. And good morning, Derek. How you doing?
Hey, I'm great. Good to be back with you.
Good to be talking with you. Got a lot of things coming up here. First things first, Friday, midnight, government shutdown. Is it going to happen?
Does it feel like we're living the movie Groundhog Day?
It really does.
It looks like we're going to, as long as progress continues to get made over these next couple of days, it looks like we're going to avert a shutdown, sadly just kicking the can a week as negotiations continue. You know, it's hard to explain the inexplicable, and I think certainly the American people get tired of this kind of governing from crisis to crisis. I think it's no way to do business, and the reality is you could put a government funding bill forward right now that a majority of Democrats and a majority of Republicans would support, and I think that's what ought to happen, and we can get this done.
We heard earlier in the week that the thoughts of adding the southern wall to the budget have been pushed off until the fall. And your thought, I can assume what your thoughts are on this wall here as being built, but what can you tell me about that?
Well, when I'm in our district, the infrastructure that people want to talk about are roads and bridges and making sure that there's access to broadband. That's the conversation that folks want to have. If we're talking about spending billions of dollars on infrastructure, I think in our neck of the woods, that's the infrastructure that folks are looking for.
One of the other things that has been working on that you have been pretty vocal about is some of the proposed EPA cuts to some key things here in Puget Sound. You are leading a bipartisan push to call on the president to support large bodies of water like Puget Sound. But have you heard any more about any potential cuts upcoming for our area?
Well, we'll see the president's budget, the full and final budget in May. What we saw this last month was basically a budget blueprint, or what gets nicknamed the skinny budget. Mm-hmm. And it was really had a lot of problems for our area, for rural areas in particular. But as you mentioned, very deep cuts to the Environmental Protection Agency. The reason that matters is, more than a significant majority of the EPA's funding is in grants and contracts for things like hazardous waste cleanup or for Puget Sound protection efforts, which again, isn't just important from an environmental ethic. That's important for our economy. We've got our fisheries, we've got our shellfish growers who depend on clean water. And so as you mentioned, what I've done is, we worked with folks who represent other areas that are impacted by this, Democrats and Republicans who represent the Great Lakes and the Chesapeake, and Puget Sound, actually worked with the whole delegation from our state, Dave Reichert and others, in putting together a bipartisan letter to the administration saying, hey, this is important, and we got to fund these sorts of vital investments that are important for clean water and for good jobs.
Treasury Secretary yesterday, Stephen Mnuchin, was out with a little bit of information on a new tax plan, biggest tax cut in history or something like that. Have you had a chance to look on that? What do you think?
Well, it's still pretty high level. We haven't seen much in the way of details. Yeah. I think this is an area where you could see Democrats and Republicans, make some progress on tax reform, because I think there's general agreement that the tax code is pretty messed up, right? Like it's, we have rates that are uncompetitive when it comes to having investment here in the United States rather than someplace else. It's a really complex tax code, which means you have to hire accountants and attorneys and do jujitsu just to pay your taxes. Mm-hmm. And it's and Lord knows middle class families need a tax break. So I think there's some opportunity there, potentially, to find some common ground. I think the concerns about what the president's put forward are really some on substance and some on process. Substantively, his plan is pretty short on details. What we do know is that the intention is to provide a tax cut, which could be stimulative to the economy, but then to not pay for it, which would drive up our national debt significantly. And the concern about that is our national debt has a drag on our economic growth. And so, I'm someone who believes that the debt's a problem and that we need to do something about it. On process, you haven't seen any outreach by the administration to Congress at all to actually talk through the specifics of this plan, to get ideas from Congress on this plan. And I always think it's hard to you expect people to be there for the landing if you haven't invited them for the takeoff.
You have reintroduced a bipartisan bill to make government data more accessible and open. What type of government data are you looking at here?
Well, think about it this way. Like when I start my morning, I check the weather app on my phone to, see what the weather's going to be. And the data that drives that app is government data. People do that to look at traffic data. There's out on the coast, the hottest surfer app right now uses data from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. So there's all sorts of government data that we already use in our day-to-day lives. We put forward a bill that says let's try to make data more accessible, not just to private industry, but to researchers, to government agencies. And the idea here is that you can drive innovation by private industry, you can create jobs, and you can save taxpayers money. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity to improve efficiency in government, to help people make smarter decisions regarding the use of taxpayer dollars. And so we've got a bill that thankfully is bipartisan and bicameral that would make data more open to the public. It would continue to protect the stuff that ought to be protected, anyone's personal information, things that currently aren't accessible under the Freedom of Information Act. But it would make non-private data open and available and machine-readable. And I think it could really empower a lot of positive change for government and drive a lot of innovation.
Over the years, we've talked, and there's been a lot of controversy about some training that is going on for the Navy over the Olympic area, also on the water with sonars and things like that, loud noises for the constituents around the area. It looks like you're kind of pressing the Navy to get some answers on what's going on here.
Yeah, I mean, listen, we know that the Navy does important work to keep our country safe. We know that it's important that the men and women who serve are able to get good training. But it's important that they, and they're good neighbors. They're neighbors, right? They're our neighbors. They have been our neighbors for decades. It's important that they be good neighbors, and we know that noise is a real issue. I was out in Forks for a meeting with a bunch of timber folks, and we had a plane fly overhead, and literally the windows just rattled. And so I understand the frustration that folks have, both in terms of the Navy's, not done everything it could to notify the public about some of their plans, to have sufficient public meetings, to not put notices out in the right places to catch the public's eye. So that's why, out of my office, we're continuing to engage the Navy and, frankly, also a lot of the environmental agencies that are tasked with, protecting both the environment and protecting quality of life. And recently sent a letter to the Navy really pressing them for some answers on the impacts of these training missions. And I just think it's important that as they look at potentially expanding activities that we really understand and know what these impacts might be. And if there's significant impacts that need to be mitigated, that needs to happen.
U.S. Congressman Derek Kilmer here from the Washington 6th District. So good information on a maybe no shutdown this week, but we are coming up on the 100th day, and whether or not it's a proper metric to gauge presidential activity, what are your thoughts on the first 100 days of the young Trump administration?
My hope is that you see more focus on things that bring our country together and that put people to work. That's not really what we've seen so far out of the administration. I'm concerned about that. The district I represent has a lot of challenges, and I mentioned we want to see a plan to grow jobs. We want to see an infrastructure bill. We want to make sure that we have an economy that works better for everybody, and we want to have a government that works better for everybody. And I think that so far has been a missed opportunity with the new administration. We haven't seen, I think, a good plan for economic growth and economic opportunity. And frankly, I've got a lot of concerns about how the administration's functioned in terms of, even just complying with basic conflict of interest rules and things like that. I think that's, and listen, to me, that's not a Democratic or Republican issue. That's an American issue. We should have a government that works for everybody.
U.S. Congressman Derek Kilmer, always nice catching up with you, and we will talk again in about a month, see how things are going.
Hey, thanks a bunch. Great to hear your voice.
Thank you. Good to talk with you.
All right. Bye-bye.
It is 7:57 at iFiber One News Radio. Always a nice chat with Representative Kilmer from Washington's 6th District.